Today we are talking about Fallout 76. I had the chance to play the game for 4 hours yesterday, get my impressions of the game, see what's good, what's bad and what's ugly with the game. And by that I mean the upsides, the downsides, as well as the parts that are not necessarily downsides in themselves or unchangeable by the players themselves, but things that just felt a little bit janky and might need some adjustments. I'm going to try and offer you as much of an unbiased perspective as possible and simply talk about the parts that I enjoyed and the parts that I don't enjoy without going much from expectations some people may have had or anything that goes in that direction or maybe previous negative bias. I just want to focus on my experience, how I felt and what that may in conclusion mean for you, or maybe even if you should consider buying or pre-ordering or not buying the game. A part that I don't want to focus on too much, and I want to say this beforehand, are lags and optimization as well as bugs with like trying to get into the game or the game randomly uninstalling. That kind of stuff is just part of the BETA experience for me, and while it's not considered a beta, I think a lot of that will get adjustments until the release. That doesn't mean that I'm ignoring it, that doesn't mean that it's not a downside when there is lag, when there are issues like that, but it's just not the focus of this. A lot of the things I will be focusing on are referring to the PC version and are slightly different on console, though you can draw the conclusion from one to the other. Let's start with the good side. The environment of Fallout 76 is honestly fantastic. There are so many similar and different areas that all have their own vibe in one way or another. You find small little details here and there that make it really cool to discover new parts, new places in the map, and that is something that I highly value, and I think this is something that really stands out for a game that is so much about exploration, about survival in this world, and about discovering this world. With those environments also come different environmental effects. For example, when I first stepped out of the vault, it was rather bright outside. Then I loaded onto another server and suddenly the same area was rainy and kind of gloomy, and I think that is something that's really cool and really adds to the atmosphere. Same as the enemies that you will see in different areas that sometimes match the areas or sometimes also feel kind of intentionally out of place, if that makes sense. The next one are the layers of the game. You have your normal questing system, you have your PvP system, you have your discovery survival system, you have your camp building system, and all sorts of things surrounding that. Your specialization, everything that you want to do, you can do basically. You have a lot of freedom to create your own world in a way, and that is how I think Bethesda wants the game to be played as well, and that's what they're emphasizing early in the game, in the story as well, so that really works out for me so far. The crossover of a single and multiplayer game is also a big plus for me. I really enjoy story-driven games, but I also really enjoy playing with friends, and there are some story-driven games that I would really like to play with my friends, which is typically not possible. This game makes it possible, and I think that is something great that should definitely be considered a big plus if you're into that kind of stuff. If you hate multiplayer, you can play Fallout 76 in a way where it's basically a single player game, completely block out other players and also mute them. So you don't have to hear them if you don't want to, but I like to be able to have this experience or even switch between those experiences at any point if I want to. It doesn't come without downsides, we'll get into those later. In that sense, you will also always be able to find others, but you can also avoid them if you prefer that. You are free to play with others and you have them in nearby surroundings most of the time. You will never really feel completely alone unless you really want to. When it comes to combat, you have a lot of flexibility as well. Not only in your playstyle and how you approach combat, but also in everything you can use for combat. For example, there's a variety of weapons, and even in the brief time that I played, I was already using 4 different melee weapons. I was using brass knuckles, a walking cane, a baseball bat, and a machete. And I had 20 others that I could have used. It feels really cool to have this huge variety and have this huge different amounts of playstyles that work in combat at least, because many games often force you into one superior combat mode. Likewise, visual changes to your characters seem very, very accessible, not only in terms of the character model that you can design, but also in terms of the equipment you find without having to pay for it at all. For example, within these few hours that I played, I could have looked like someone who escaped from a psych ward, I could have looked like a greaser, or I could have maybe looked like an astronaut as well if I wanted to. So there is really so much stuff to find and so much customization without even paying for it, plus obviously the stuff that you can pay for. As an extension of that, not only character customization is going to be huge, but modification of weapons as well. There are so many different attachments for your weapons that you can really design any weapon to the style of your choice, given that you have the right amount of tools that you can adjust on that weapon. Being able to customize a good weapon to exactly the stats that you like is something I personally really enjoy. And as we're already talking about customization, another big thing is going to be base customization. You can place your base in very unconventional places and you can do some really cool stuff with it and build pretty cool structures on it. I didn't have too much of a look into it and I unfortunately was not able to record it, but I can assure you that the base customization in what you can build in the base is absolutely cool and you can definitely make your own home. Again, there are downsides to that, we will come to that. The leveling and special or perk system is something I personally really enjoy. I think the way it's designed with a little bit of random luck, but also a little bit of specialization that you kind of choose yourself is very nice and will make for some very interesting different loadouts depending on what you want to specialize in. I think it's going to be interesting to see how many people actually opt completely out of combat specs here, because I think it's still going to be an important part of the game. But I do think that overall it's going to be something that really impacts the game. Between the customized weapons and your customized base and then the customized specials, characters will feel dramatically different between each other without having to be different classes or something like in other games. Another big plus for me personally is that you can gather a lot of things. If you find a log on the ground, you can gather wood. If you walk through a river, you can gather water. If you find a plant, you can probably gather it too, and all that kind of stuff. And I enjoy that. I'm just a sucker for picking things up from the ground where you go, and I like it when the world is that interactive, so when you see something, you can probably take it with you. You walk through a cornfield, okay, pick up a ton of corn if you want to. And that's already speaking about things you can pick up. If you're fighting an enemy and they're using a cool weapon like a shotgun, there's a good chance you can actually pick up that weapon afterwards. And that's something I always enjoy, and I dislike the opposite when somebody has a really cool weapon and you can't loot that. Just a little gimmick for me. Overall, I will say that in Fallout 76 there is a lot to do. I cannot repeat this often enough. It's just so much to do in the world, so much to explore, and I think that makes for a great foundation for a game. So far, in that sense, my experience with Fallout 76 was very positive. That does not mean that my experience was without flaws, and that's what we're going to now with the bad. Again, I will briefly address this here, but not go in depth. There were quite a few performance issues in terms of how the game was working, or if textures were loading and the graphics were overall. Considering I have a very high-end PC, that really shouldn't have been the case, and there is some optimization work to be done here for sure. That is something that may or may not happen in the next 2 weeks. I'm not entirely convinced, but I hope it will. What was a way bigger issue for me, and this is specifically a PC issue here, is the menu navigation and the key bindings. It completely feels like the game is a console port so far. To give you some examples of that, if you press M, you open your map. So you would think that if you press escape, you would open up your menu, as you do in every other game. But instead, if you press escape, you also open up your map, much like you would on a controller if you go into the options and there is no other room for a menu. Then to get into the menu, you have to press Z. I don't know why out of all keys they chose Z here. And that then gets you to the actual menu where you can adjust your settings. Absolutely makes no sense. Likewise, for example, if you're trying to switch a weapon, you would natively, as a PC user, use your mouse wheel. And that doesn't really work in the same way as well, because it kind of brings up a menu that lets you switch through your weapons. You can select them rather than just switching through your weapons, or your favorites rather. And that is something that makes sense for a console again, where you don't have that quick mouse wheel scrolling, but it absolutely makes no sense for a PC. The entire list of key bindings that you can even use is completely incomplete, so you won't find out certain things from this list, but even changing these keys isn't without issue. For example, for the building menu, certain things absolutely make no sense. Right now, switching between different objects you want to build is on the Z and C key. As anyone who's not using a standard QWERTY keyboard, this is absolutely terrible, because on a QWERTZ keyboard, the Z is at a completely different place. So thank you very much for not considering any German players at all. And that's not where it ends. There's just a lot of clunky mess when it comes to how you navigate through menus. A lot of it's done via tab. You go back via tab, which is absolutely not an intuitive key. The right mouse button, on the other hand, or even the mouse itself, hardly get any use. The mouse wheel could also be utilized way more for the PC version, and that would make navigation so much simpler. I know this is an issue that has been long standing with Fallout, but it really shouldn't be an issue in a multiplayer that relies so much on using these menus to search through your stuff, to build your camp, and do everything else really. Sure, I could just switch to using a controller, but if I wanted to play the game with a controller, then why would I want to play it on the PC in the first place? I want to play a shooter with a mouse, and I want the bindings to be native to the mouse instead of feeling like a console port all the way through. And trust me, if you're playing on PC, this is going to become frustrating, even if it sounds like I'm just complaining about it now. That is, again, even worse when it comes to camp building. The bindings for camp building are all over the place and make no sense at all. Another big issue, the most complained about issue at the moment, is the complete lack of push to talk. The audio in the game is on by default if you have a microphone attached to your PC, so you will be hearing other players the moment you get into the game, and you can imagine this is kind of awkward. You just try to listen to the story and you hear someone mumbling around the background. Or hear their TV or whatever, because no one can go on push to talk. You either mute them or you will hear all their background noise, whatever they're playing, unless you want to mute every other player that you come across. This is not a standard that should hold up in the 2000 games industry in any way at all. There's also a lack of visual settings. For example, you have motion blur and bloom by default, and a lot of people don't want that, or it even makes them motion sick. So why is that a thing? You cannot adjust your field of view. And there are also other issues. For example, right now your movement is tied to your frames per second. The game is locked into VSync by default, which again shouldn't be the case, but you can kind of turn it off in not the menu but in the config. If you do that, however, you're suddenly super fast and the entire game is faster because you now unlock the FPS and your movement is tied to FPS. This was an issue in Fallout 4, and it's understandable that maybe they were too lazy to fix it in Fallout 4, an older engine, whatever. But it cannot be an issue in a multiplayer that's coming out in a time where a lot of people have 144Hz monitors or more. It's not feasible anymore because people buy the PC version for these benefits, for these better graphics and the better frame rate. And if this frame rate then basically leads to them hacking unintentionally and being faster than everyone else in the game, that's no fun for anyone, and that desperately needs fixing. It's gonna be hard to fix that in time, I imagine, considering how this engine is probably coded. So in many ways, as much as I enjoyed Fallout 76, the tech side is really a mess, and it's strange that that's still the case at this point when the game is supposed to come out soon. Obviously it's catering to consoles more, we saw that through the early Xbox release, but again, a huge market of Fallout players is on PC. And a lot of the new players like me are also on PC. You can't just completely ignore that part of the player base and what they expect from a game different from the console players. Some smaller issues that are also encountered are the fact that timed events just seem to repeat themselves. There is this farmhand attack in the first village and that just happens over and over, and I thought the timed events would be something more special than that. I don't know if that's the case for all events, but it looks a bit weird so far. And that enemy levels can be really misleading. A level 6 enemy can sometimes be a one-hit target with the right weapon, and in other situations a level 6 enemy can suddenly be very scary if they have the right weapon. Okay, probably not that scary, but doing a lot more damage than basically no damage at all. And that brings us to the ugly, the messy parts that kind of can be changed, aren't that dramatic, but I think shouldn't be the way they are. The first one is that you can listen to the holotapes at any point of the game, but unfortunately, if you turn on the subtitles, what I think is very useful because sometimes there's a lot of stuff going on and you want to have those subtitles below to just keep on reading along while something else is happening, those will only show as long as you're not in any of the menus. And I think listening to the holotape and going through your menu and sorting your stuff or eating something, drinking something would be the perfect time to do that. You have nothing else to do really because you're listening to that stuff. So you might as well filter through your junk. Why does that cause the subtitles to disappear? That would actually be the ideal situation for them to be there and to listen to the stuff with no interruption. And there is enough room at the bottom panel to put the subtitles there, so really that one just feels completely strange to me. Additionally, the VATS is just not working properly. I don't know if it's a common issue or if it just was an issue for me, but I was using it and sometimes it just wouldn't target properly, and I don't know if this is a beta issue or a PC issue, but it was just super weird to me. I actually chose to not use it at later points because it just wouldn't function. Storytelling in the game is unique and I find it interesting with the holotapes. The problem that I have with it is that the holotapes are very long, they can be drawn out, and it's kind of counterintuitive when playing in a team. Either you completely coordinate with your team that you're all gonna listen to all the tapes at the same time and then move on to the next point and listen to the same tape, but especially with places where you find a lot of tapes, this just gets really chaotic and you either stand around together for a long time or it just gets weird. That is an issue you don't have when you play solo, but as the game is kind of enticing you to play multiplayer, I'm not quite sure if the storytelling via holotapes was the right pathing here, and we'll see how that develops down the road. Another weird thing is the fact that you have mouse smoothing, meaning your mouse slows down when you aim down on a target, which just feels super strange if you're used to not having mouse smoothing, and I kind of felt off with my aim half the time because of it. So that should definitely be something we should be able to disable. And last but not least, the inventory with all the categories we have right now still feels very chaotic. There's a lot of stuff that is hard to sort through, especially in the section where you have all your Medipack stuff as well as your food and your drinks. And really a different structure would be nice here. And I get the idea of the visual design of the Pip-Boy, but it makes things harder than they have to be in this particular context. And before we come to a conclusion, I also have a few question marks, basically things where I'm not quite sure where they're going. One is the long-term content. I am not sure if it's going to be the base building or if it's something else. I am not quite sure what's going to happen once you end up finishing the quests and if the game might quickly become repetitive with those events being the same over and over, or if there's something else that we can work towards. But that's something we'll just learn about in the future. Also, some of the areas felt really empty. Sometimes I was desperately looking for enemies or something to do, and I guess this loneliness is sometimes intended, but at other times you just wish something was going on so you could, progress in the game somehow. A lot of the question marks and a lot of the problems can also be solved with the aggressive patch cycle that Bethesda has been talking about, making quick adjustments to the game. But we really have to hope that that happens, because from what we know from Fallout 4 or what others know from Fallout 4, they aren't exactly known to have the most massive overhauls to bigger issues that people are complaining about. So we'll have to see if they do it this time, if they make it right, or if the game remains clunky for PC players especially, and I hope that's not the case. And with that, let's conclude this a little bit. If the question is, should you buy Fallout 76? My answer so far is, depends on what you're after. I think the game in itself feels great, and you also only pay for it one time. You have this one single price, the same as a single player game basically, and after that, if you really want to, you can buy extra cosmetics for money, but other than that, every future content will be free, and that is something that I, in these days, value very much. I think in terms of the time that you will spend in the game versus what you spend on it, it will be worth its price overall. I've spent 4 hours in the game so far and I've had a lot of fun and I've had a lot of different things to do, and I haven't even progressed in the story all too much, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the story will keep me busy for quite a long time after this, and the side quests will too, so you won't run out of things to do in the foreseeable future, and that I think is one of the most important things when it comes to how you look at a game. With the game overall feeling great, in my opinion, I can recommend it in that sense as well. If, however, you're somebody who is very much focused on a game being as polished as possible, then I would say wait for now. Even on console, the game has quite a few issues with its frame rates and similar stuff, which kind of makes you think there could be some improvements, but the console versions generally seem to be pretty decent at this point. The PC version, on the other hand, needs a lot of stuff that needs to be ironed out unless you want to play it with a controller. I will probably address this topic again towards the end of the BETA, because then we will know how much Bethesda has already fixed or how much they're planning to fix very, very soon. And that is something that could give us a better impression of how the game is developing towards the future as well. If you choose to buy the game, you'll catch me in West Virginia making the best tea you've ever seen. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell that helps you out, and I will obviously continue making Fallout 76 content as well as Smite content, so you can check that out in the next days. Other than that, see you for the next one later or tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.